let's get started. Good morning, I'm Kotz. I'm one of the pastors here, and we are in the middle of a series called Thoughts of an Inmate because we're talking about the book of Philippians. Philippians was written by a guy named Paul who was in prison when he wrote this letter, and we happen to have a copy of it. Everybody has a copy of it. And we've been going through chapter 1, and by the end of the year, we'll finish chapter 2. And then the new year, after Christmas and New Year's, we will start chapter 3 and finish it with 4. There's only 4 chapters in the entire book. So today we're finishing up chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1, verses 27 through 30. That's what we're looking at today. If you want to follow along, you can. Everything will be up here if you don't have a Bible. Okay, so let me give you a quick recap. Okay, so up until now in Philippians, Paul starts off by saying, hey, it's me, Paul. I got your gift. They sent him food. He's in prison. And in prison in the Roman Empire, they don't serve food. So it's up to your friends and families to deliver food. He's like, I got your food, Church of Philippi. Thank you so much. And then he gives this short description of the suffering that he's been going through. And then after that, he says, you know what, but it's not so bad. I mean, the torture and that's bad. But because I'm in prison, some good things are happening. So, either way, even if they kill me, there might be some silver lining in that too. So he has this very optimistic view. What we're going to look at today is when he stops that thought and he says, enough about me, now let's talk about you. You, the people in the church in a city called Philippi. Church of Philippi, hence Philippians. You're like, Philippians, I don't know anything about this place. So I'm going to give you a quick history of the church in Philippi. So first, here's a picture of what it looks like today. Nobody lives there now because obviously there's no homes, okay? But 2,000 years ago, artist rendering, they think this is what it looked like. Here we go. Goes all the way up there. And it was pretty much a very rich city. It's like what is that? What's a rich neighborhood? Brentwood. Santa Monica. Culver City. I don't know. Okay, no, you're like, no. Okay, but there you go. This is where Paul wrote a letter. Paul is in prison all the way in Rome, okay? And he sent a letter to this city. Because in this city, if you read through the book of Acts, or if you were with us when we went through the book of Acts, you'll note that Paul went to Philippi. By the way, this is the first church of Europe, and it was started by women. Interesting, right? Do you guys remember? Remember the name of the lady who started it? Yeah, you can look it up later. Okay. Yeah, homework. Okay, so Paul comes here. He goes inside. He's looking for a Jewish synagogue to tell them about Jesus. And he comes in. He doesn't see anybody. He's on his way out. And as he steps outside of the walls of the city, back then, every city had walls. That's what a city was, anything within walls. He steps outside, and he sees a small congregation of women. And he said, hey, I was looking for a Jewish community. Were you out here back in those days? In order to have an official building of a Jewish congregation, there had to be a certain amount of men. And because there weren't enough men who had that faith, Paul started with these women. And so probably, I don't know which part of the wall they met in, but that's where they met. Okay, so a few years passed after that. Paul's in prison. So Paul writes a letter to this city right here, especially to the church. And churches were in people's homes back then. So there's this one lady who got the letter, and she's reading it to her congregation. Okay, where is Philippi? Here's a world map. In the world map, this is Italy right here, the boot shape right there. That's the epicenter of the Roman Empire. Next slide. Philippi is over here where Greece is, right around there. Okay, that's Philippi. It's a really nice city. And the reason why it's a nice city, well, there's a really interesting story about this. And we're going to do a little history lesson. About 80 years before the letter of Philippi was written, there was this character by the name of Julius Caesar. We're going to call him JC, not Jesus Christ. Julius. I know it's confusing, so we're going to give him a head. Next slide, here we go. There. Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar was the ruler who was at the top of the Roman Republic. It wasn't an empire yet, but he wanted to make it into an empire. So he basically, he came to Rome and he was like, hey, I want to be the leader of the Romans. And a lot of people are like, yeah, he's a great military leader. Let's make him our leader. And he said, it's much more efficient if only one person led the whole thing. So why not let everybody just step down and you uplift me and I will be your ruler? And he started gaining a lot of power, more and more power. And as he gained power, a lot of people were like, yay. But there's another group of people who are like, ooh, this is dangerous. when one person has this much power, usually it doesn't end well. So, it wasn't planned, but somebody executed him. So next slide. Okay, so he's gone. And they said, yay, we could go back to being a republic, but, when there's like vacancy on the throne, instead of people saying, hey, let's go back to being equal, they say something like, hey, I want that job. I want to be the big kahuna, right? I want to be that guy. And so there were 4 people who really wanted this spot, but there's only one throne. So here are the 4 people. Brutus, Cassius, Mark Antony, and Octavian. Octavian is the adopted child of Julius Caesar. So, just put him in an arena and fight it out and see who wins, right? No, that's not what they did. They teamed up. So team Mark Antony and Octavian versus team Brutus and Cassius. They came, go ahead. The animation's cool. Yeah, okay. So they came over here and they fought him out there. Okay. Now, this battle is called the Battle of Philippi because it took place, next slide, outside these walls, right around here or there. I'm not sure, somewhere here. And so Philippi was a very important place for these 2 men. But wait a minute, there's 2 men. Let's go next slide. There's 2 men. There's only one throne. So what happens? Well, they first tried to make this little truce, like hey, we're going to be brothers, right? It's like, yeah. As a matter of fact, Octavian's like, I have a sister. Mark Antony, why don't you marry her and then we'll be brothers-in-law. That'd be really cool, right? But, I don't know if you know, but Mark Antony had this thing for this lady in Egypt. What was her name? Elizabeth Taylor, was it? All you young people have no idea what I'm talking about. Cleopatra, right? And so this truce starts to fall apart. Next slide. So what happens? Octavian comes over and does the same thing he did to the other guys. Okay, so now we're left with this guy. And when he realizes there's nobody else in the world is going to come against me, you're like, this is kind of cool. I have all the power. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put on some new clothes. So next slide. So he dresses up like this. And then he says, I'm going to change my name. So it's no longer O, next slide. It's going to be C-A, Caesar Augustus. And he becomes the first official Caesar of an empire, a Roman empire. He gains a lot of power. And now that he's this one person who has the power to rule all the known world at that time, he looks and he says, how am I supposed to rule over all this when I could barely walk a few miles a day, right? There's these places far, far away that I can't rule. So he decides, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make incentives, ways to control these people. So the first thing he did was, next slide, he said, the people of Philippi, because my rise to power happened right outside your city, I am going to give everybody who lives in Philippi the right to call themselves Roman citizens. And to be a Roman citizen comes with a lot of perks. For example, if you do something bad, you're left the hook a lot of times. Other people, they'll be crucified or killed, right? So, there's a lot of things. Not only that, the people who fought in that war, right? They're getting older and older. They're getting ready to retire. Next slide. So the people who retired, okay, why don't you go and live right there in Philippi? And once you live there, as a thank you, I'm going to give you land. I'm going to give you protection. I'm going to give you, if I have the power to pardon any crime, so I'm going to do that for you guys. I'm going to give you wealth. I'm going to give you anything you could think about. This is the ultimate retirement city for people who are part of the Roman Empire. So Philippi was a retirement city of loyal Roman soldiers and officials. So if you're living there, chances are you're going to bump into somebody that is always Hail Caesar, that kind of thing, happening all the time, right? Now, eventually, Caesar Augustus dies, and another one takes his place. And that person gets poisoned, and another person takes his place, and that person gets poisoned, and that person gets assassinated. And eventually, right, by the time that Paul writes the letter of Philippians, we have a new Caesar in town, and his name is Caesar Nero. Whoa, that's a big face. Okay. Now, by then, Caesar Nero was not happy just being the emperor of the known world. He wanted to be more than that. And for that reason, he said, I don't want people to just come up to me and say, hello, Mr. Nero, or Caesar Nero, or King Nero. I want them to call me by something greater than that. So in Latin, he said, I want people to call me this, Kyrios and Soter. Kyrios and Soter, which translates to Lord and Savior. He wanted everybody to call him Lord and Savior. As a matter of fact, if you don't, then you're in deep, deep trouble. As a matter of fact, let's look at Philippi again. If you look to the far end of Philippi, right over here, you see that there's a little round-looking building right there? Well, that's not just a round-looking building. Next slide. It's this. This is where they have all their entertainment. And just like, like at a baseball game or a football game or whatever game you go to, before every game there's like, please stand, take off your hat for the Pledge of Allegiance. They had a Pledge of Allegiance to the Caesar, and everybody would stand. And if you fail to say that he is my Lord and Savior, right? If you don't stand like everybody else around you is standing, because remember, everybody there is loyal, right? And they look around, they're like, wait a minute, why are there like a dozen people over there not standing? And they would say, well, that's because we don't think that Caesar Nero is Lord and Savior. We think Jesus is. Now remember, these are people who make a living, right? Their livelihood, their retirement plan, all depends on Caesar being in a good mood to make sure that they keep getting these benefits, right? So if Caesar hears about this small group of people who refuse to stand in the beginning of their show, Caesar might end up being really cranky and be like, hey, no, you don't get those benefits anymore. So you can imagine what it felt like to be a Christian in the first century in Philippi. You were surrounded by people who are super loyal to not just Caesar, but also loyal to making sure that you stay silent. Okay? By the way, there's also this other thing that's happening where just to make sure that this whole Caesar is Lord and Savior thing was going on, that will continue, they made it hard for people to buy or sell unless you took on the mark of the Caesar, or as the Christians call them, the beast, right? That you're not able to participate in commerce if you weren't able to worship the Caesar. And Christians had a really hard time buying and selling things back then. So the point I'm trying to make is this. The Philippians, the Philippian Christians, they refused to place Roman ideals over the Christian gospel. What is the Christian gospel? The Christian gospel is this. We believe that Jesus is Lord. Yeah, I see Caesar is sitting on the throne of Rome right now, but we believe that Jesus is sitting on the throne of the universe. And whatever he says goes. And what does he say? He says that the building blocks of this world is love. The Roman gospel, the Roman ideal is if we all want to have peace one day, right? But the way that we're going to achieve peace is by eliminating the people who disagree with us. So, like, hey, Caesar is Lord. You disagree? You're dead. Hey, Caesar is Lord. You disagree? You're dead. They use force to achieve peace. That's the gospel of the Romans. The gospel of Jesus is not, let's force people to fall in line. It's, we're going to use love to persuade people to live in peace. This is the gospel of generosity. This is the gospel of love. This is the gospel of forgiveness and redemption and making sure that people who have no voice has a voice. Like, this is the gospel that they say, we are loyal to this gospel, not the gospel of Caesar. What was really hard in those days, in the first century, was that these Christians, although there's only a few of them in Philippi, they have made a commitment to live as if the gospel of Jesus was the true gospel. And what that included was loving their neighbors. But on the other hand, the Romans, all the retired people, they were loyal to Caesar. They believed that the way that they're going to achieve peace is by silencing and bullying the Christians. So this is weird because this is what happened. These Christians were heavily persecuted by the neighbors they vowed to love. Can you just imagine what their life was like? Like, these Christians were pulled out of their houses and beat to the ground. And they would stand up and they think that they're about to retaliate, but they're like, Christians like, no, we're not going to retaliate. Because if we retaliate so that we feel good about ourselves, we're no better than Caesar. We're using violence and force to achieve peace. That is not who we are. These are the people who are like, Paul, we read your letter, we understand your suffering, but we are suffering too. And Paul's writing this letter saying, I know about your suffering. Let me tell you a few things I have a few thoughts. As an inmate, I have a few thoughts about suffering, and that's where we're going to pick up today. Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. He says this. Paul says, whatever happens, dear Philippians, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. What he's saying is, I need you to listen to me. There's two things I want you to do. Here's the first one. I want you to behave. Behave as if the gospel of Jesus is true. Don't behave as if the gospel of Nero or Caesar is true. Because the gospel of Caesar is, let's retaliate. If there's somebody that makes us angry, we could silence that opposition by using force. And Paul says, if you do that, you're living as if the gospel of Nero is true. But you're not like that. I want you to behave as if the gospel of Jesus is true. Nonviolence. Forgiveness. When somebody takes your jacket, give him your shirt also. If somebody were to smack you in the face, turn the other cheek. Oh my gosh, imagine living in that world, right? I know a lot of Christians today are like, oh, they won't let me pray at school, it's persecution. No, that's persecution 2,000 years ago. Okay, the gospel of Christ is to say, I have made a vow to love and to forgive and to be generous towards those people who are beating me down every day. And he says, I want you to do this. I want you to, number one, behave as if the gospel of Jesus is true. No matter how hard it gets, live as if Jesus is on the throne of the universe, not Nero. And then here's the second part. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, like I'm in prison, I'm not sure if I'm going to get out, so I don't know if I'm going to come see you or not. But whatever the case is, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. So he says, here's the second thing I want you to do. Always, always, with your small group of people, I want you to be in one spirit. I want you to be unified. Okay? What that means is, if you see, make up a name, Phil the Philippian, right? It's getting beat down. You will come in and say, I will join him in the suffering. Beat me down too. If somebody robs somebody of their stuff, you say, hey, I am going to give my stuff away too. I am willing to join you in your suffering. These are the two things I want you to do. I want you to behave as if the gospel is true. And number two, be in unity in the suffering that you're experiencing. And then he says this. This is the interesting thing. This suffering together thing will be a sign to them, the people who are persecuting you, that they, the persecutors, will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. Okay, this is so weird. So you see all these people getting beat down in unity, right? Okay, look at those Christians. They have nothing. Ha, 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 right? And Paul says, when they see that, they're going to see that, and they're going to look at themselves and say, oh, this is a sign that we're being destroyed and that they're going to be saved. How does that work? Like, Paul, you've been in prison too long. I think you're going a little kooky. Like, what's going on here? Let me just clarify what he's saying here. 3 parts to what he's saying here. The first thing he says is this. They will make you suffer. Okay? The second thing is this. They will see you suffer together. And this is the third part that I think is the big mystery. They will intuitively know that they are the ones destined for destruction. What does he mean by this? How does that happen? Paul explains the next verse. For it has been granted to you, meaning it was a gift to you, on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. Like, wait, Paul, you're telling me that when we suffer, it's a gift from Jesus? Like, happy birthday, what do I get? Suffering, oh, you're like, I think Paul has lost it, right? Since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. So what is Paul talking about here? Since when is suffering a gift, right? It's like, oh, not only that, I have the same suffering too. So hey, we have the same present from Jesus. What is he talking about? Like, who here in the right mind thinks that suffering is a good thing? He's talking about a specific kind of suffering. When you do something good, when you're bringing heaven on earth, when you are showing love and forgiveness and generosity, when you claim that Jesus is Lord and not that chump Nero, when you say things like that, he says you're going to eventually go against the Roman Empire. And when that happens, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Here's an animation that I borrowed from the Bible Project. He says, when you are the person who is being persecuted for the right reasons, not doing something bad, okay, but right, you are actually in a chain and a community, probably not around you, but through history, of people who have suffered at the hands of evil empires, right? And he's like, and I'm part of that too, and guess who else is a part of that? Jesus. If you are persecuted for showing love, justice, generosity, if you are being persecuted because you are caring for the least of these, right? If you are showing love to the people who are lonely, society said, this person has nothing to do with us, and you go with that person and you show that person love. You might be ostracized for that. If you show love and care for the socially sidelined, to the poor, if you're showing generosity to the poor, he says, you are in good company. Because guess what? If you are persecuted for these reasons, you are being persecuted for the same reasons that Jesus was persecuted. So that's why this is a gift. You are aligning yourself with Jesus now. So what Paul is saying here is this. When we suffer together, they will intuitively know that we are dying for what is right while they are living for what is wrong. Now, how does that work? Like, is there some kind of formula that, okay. So this is where I get really theological, okay? But, so imagine the situation here. Good people are being beat down together. And I'm standing here beating that person down. And deep in my soul, in my DNA, in the core of who I am, he's saying, deep down inside, I will know that they are doing what is right, and I am part of something that is definitely wrong. Like I might not say it to you guys, but deep down inside, I know that they are right and I am wrong. That they are going to be saved and I'm being led to destruction. And what he means by this is this, okay? This is the part where we get theological. The image of God is in every single person, okay? The image of God inside of us recognizes the ideals of God. Theologian N.T. Wright, he calls this the eschatological recognition, which you don't have to remember. I'm not going to test you on that. What this means is this, okay? God is rebuilding this world to be more and more the ideal. In a world that's an ideal in the future. In the future, forgiveness and love and generosity and that kind of world will eventually exist, okay? And there'll be no more racism. There's no more male nor female. There's no slave nor master. There's no more of that, okay? So everybody's going to be equal. Everybody's going to be treating each other with respect. That's the world we're headed towards. And he says, and the Christians are the people who are living that out right now. And as a person who's inflicting the hurt, I have an image of God inside of me that hasn't really been activated, but it's there somewhere. And when I see something that's supposed to happen in the future happen in front of me, when I see that instead of hurting people, that you're trying to protect people, and that you're willing to voluntarily go in and suffer along with that person, something inside me says, that looks beautiful. That looks right. Which makes me wrong and ugly. There's something inside, deep inside my soul, that's crying out saying, that's what I want in my life. When we behave in the way that Christ wants us to behave, and we are unified together in the suffering of other people, when you see that, you start to yearn for the things of God. And eventually you start to think, while they are being destroyed, I feel like this is going to be their salvation, but I'm the one that's safe right now, but I feel like I'm headed towards destruction. What he's saying is, when you do what Christ did, and if you suffer the same way that Christ suffered, something inside of the persecutor, it resonates with something deep within their soul that they are headed for destruction. So here's another animation. He says, when somebody is about to attack you, and you're going to be hurt, a Christian doesn't retaliate. We don't live according to the gospel of Nero. We live according to the gospel of Jesus, where we heal and show love to the people who are persecuting us, and for that reason, they change. He says, in the world that Christ is creating for us, the building blocks is not made of violence and power and strength and wealth. The future world that God's creating for us is built out of love and generosity and forgiveness. When one group of people says we're better than that group of people, just because of the race that we are, or because of where we were raised, or where, whatever, because of how much stuff we have, he says, when you look at that, you realize how shallow it is, and you realize that you're headed for destruction. But when you see somebody, a community of people who stands for each other, regardless if they're masters or slaves or women or male or whatever the case may be, they said that is going to be the salvation. What I'm a part of is part of the destruction. Now, when I was thinking about this and I was reading this and studying this, I was like, what do we know in recent history that relates to this? And I thought about this. This is Dr. King. And they all gathered together because they felt like we need to bring some of that future right here, right now. In the future, there is no racism. So why don't we bring that here today? And they marched down the streets. But what's interesting is, as more and more people saw that and said, now this is going to be their salvation. They didn't just join in and say, I want to walk with you. No. Dr. King had this really interesting idea. He said, if you want to join me in this march, you have to sign this waiver first. I want to show you a copy of that waiver. This is called the 10 Commandments of Nonviolence. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Let me read a few of them to you. Like number 1 says, meditate daily on the teachings of the life of Jesus. Number 3 says, walk and talk in a manner of love, for God is love. Like, if you want to join me in this march, you have to agree with all 10 of these things. Sacrifice personal wishes in order that all men might be free. Observe with both friend and foe the ordinary rules of courtesy. If you're going to retaliate, you can't be a part of this group, because that's not what the future looks like. Seek to perform regular service for others and for the world. Refrain from violence of fist, tongue, and heart. It's like you have to make a commitment. If you're going to go on this march, no violence, not even in your head. You can't even say, well, you're beating me down, but I'm going to have the last words. Like, no, not even with your tongue. Strive to be good, to be in good spiritual and bodily health. Follow the direction of the movement and of the captain of the demonstration, and then it's like put your name, address, phone number, and nearest relative, and address. But he says, if you want to be a part of this march, you have to promise me and sign this document saying that you're not going to retaliate and that we're going to stick together. Because unless you do that, we can't bring that future into the present. And when people saw that, and people threw rocks at them, people hurled insults at them, right? And through it all, these people said nothing in return. When somebody was beat down on the ground, the people who were marching with that person would pick that person up or join in the suffering of that person getting beat down. And you know what Dr. King said a lot during this time? He quoted first Philippians chapter 1, verse 28. He said this over and over again. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. He said that over and over and over again. Now, what does that mean for us? Because we're not living in this time anymore, or maybe we are. But what does it look like to us in our daily lives? When I was living in Northern California, I met this person who just got married, had a kid, and he started working in this law firm. And he told me this story about how when he would go to work, he gets off at a certain time. I can't remember what time it was. And so he would get in his car, drive home to his family. And one time, I guess one of the executives of that firm came up to him and said, that's weird is that I don't see your car in the parking lot after this hour of the day, and I don't see your car in the parking lot on the weekends. If you want to go up the ladder of this firm, you have to put in extra hours. And my friend said, sorry, but my loyalty is to my family. I'm spending my time with my newborn child and my wife. Now, what, from the executive's perspective, could it look like this is going to be your destruction? Deep down inside, I bet these people are thinking, while you're not going to work your way up this ladder, this corporate ladder I set for you, this choice you just made is leading to your salvation, and this is leading to our destruction. When a group of people are in school and they pull a prank and you get caught, and you are one of those people, and somebody says, a teacher or somebody comes up to you and says, did you do this? And instead of pointing fingers, it's like, oh, it wasn't me, it wasn't us, it was those guys over there. Instead of saying, yes, that was me. I am sorry, I'll take responsibility for it. Your friends who are trying to hide behind you are going to look at you and say, I can't believe what this person is doing. He just ratted himself out. Like, yeah, this is leading to his destruction, right? But deep down inside, like the honesty, the integrity there, they're thinking, this is going to lead to that person's salvation. This is leading to our destruction. When you see somebody who doesn't have much, but that person comes across somebody who's in need and says, I don't have much, but here you go, and that person gives whatever that person has to the other person, the world will say, oh my gosh, that is just so, that's going to lead to your destruction. But deep down inside, they know that that's going to lead to that person's salvation, and that us not being generous is going to lead to our destruction. When somebody hits you, and you said, I'm not going to hit back, and that person takes advantage of you and hits you again, and everybody in the crowd says, oh, you got to hit him back, you got to hit him back, let him know. No. People might think that this is leading to your destruction. They're going to pick on you, take advantage of you. But Paul would say, this is leading to that person's salvation. And deep down inside, everybody else knows that this is leading to their destruction. When I was in seminary, there was this professor who worked his way up to he's basically the top guy in the seminary. His wife got sick. And he gave up his high position. It took him a long time to get there. He gave that job up because he said that his wife is so terminally ill that she had one hope, like this one dream that she wanted to fulfill, which is that she wanted to live in Colombia, which, I don't know, is that a nice place? I've never been there. But he said, I'm going to give up my job. I'm going to give up my career so I could spend the last few days with my wife in Colombia. And everybody's like, you worked so hard to get there. It might look like destruction to the world, but in reality, that is what's leading to his salvation. And everybody who's watching it knows deep down inside that a person who gives up their work for the sake of loving somebody else, that's leading to that person's salvation. So, two things. Paul says, I want you to behave as if the gospel of Jesus is true. And I want you to stand together. And he said, if you keep doing this, no matter what the Roman retired soldiers do to you, people look at you and say, that is leading to your salvation. And deep down inside their soul, the little image of God that they have inside of them, they will intuitively know that what we are doing right now to them is leading to our destruction. Amen? All right, let's close in prayer.